Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here today with 3 guests talking about a subject that I have wanted to talk about for years, and we finally are doing a show about it, which I'm really excited about. So we are going to be joined today by my sister, Rebecca. I want to say Bara Horsley, but it's Horsley Bara. I don't know what. Rebecca Horsley Bara, she's right here. Next to Rebecca is Elizabeth Devita-Raeburn, and next to her is Keith Singer.
Hello.
Everybody here has been on our show before, and Elizabeth and I have talked about this topic a lot and said, we've got to talk about this. We are talking about parenting after a sibling loss. You hear all the time about how people that have lost children, they parent the surviving siblings differently. But we rarely have a show about, we've never had a show, in fact, about how do we, as siblings that have had a sibling death, parent differently now that we have children. I mean, when my brother died, he was only 17, and he and my cousin died together in a car accident. I didn't have children until years later, but I parent them differently because I had a brother that died. So we're going to talk more with our guests about how their parenting is different and how they feel the death of a sibling has impacted the way that they parent their children today. Before we do that, I'm going to introduce all of them. So I'm going to introduce my sister first. Rebecca Horsley Bara. She's the president of the Open to Hope Foundation. Our brothers Scott and cousin Matthew died together, as I said, in a car accident when they were both 17. Rebecca holds a master's degree in transpersonal psychology and is currently pursuing her PhD. She is a yoga instructor and a holistic health coach. Rebecca also serves as a trustee on the Compassionate Friends Foundation board and is an emeritus board member for the Art of Yoga Project. And Rebecca has 4 children. They range in age from 32, her oldest Eliza, all the way down to 23. Ryan just turned 23. I'm glad I got that. My nieces and nephews. I myself have 2 children, my 26-year-old boy, and I have a daughter that's 19. So next to Rebecca is Elizabeth Devita-Raeburn. Elizabeth is an author, journalist, and blogger. Her brother Ted died at age 17 of a rare autoimmune disease. There was a movie starring John Travolta that was based loosely on Ted's life, and it is called The Boy in the Bubble. Elizabeth's stories have appeared in the Washington Post, Self, Glamour, Psychology Today, and many other journals. She is the author of The Empty Room, Understanding Sibling Loss, which I loved the book, would highly recommend. And she's the co-author of the book The Death of Cancer, which she wrote with her father, Dr. Vincent Devita. She has 2 sons. I'm going to try to get their ages. One is 19 or 18?
18, just turned 18.
One is 18, and your youngest is 15.
Right, also just turned 15. Yep.
Just turned 15, so 2 boys, 15 and 18. Next to her is Keith Singer. Keith facilitates Compassionate Friends monthly sibling meetings for his local chapter. He lost his sister Lori in an automobile accident while she was active duty serving in the U.S. Navy. Thank you for her service. I just got back from a TAPS conference working with military families who have had a loss. So. Keith also moderates panels and facilitates workshops at the National Compassionate Friends conferences. One of his most popular workshops that he facilitates is a sibling panel for parents who can ask questions in hope of bridging the gap between parent and surviving sibling. And I know it's like standing room only, as you know. So welcome, Keith. Keith has 2 sons, 8 and 5.
5 and 3.
5 and 3. Why did I say 8 and 5?
He'll say
5 and 3.
Justin will tell
Okay.
you 3 and a half.
So we've got them all over the board with our children. So let's talk about this. Let me see. What should be the first question? I don't even know. What do you think, Rebecca? Parenting after a sibling loss. Maybe how it changes.
How it changes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I know with my 4 children, I was definitely in the back of my mind, I always had this anxiety that something would happen to them. And they knew especially when they were teenagers, they had to check in with me about where they're going. I tried to give them space and not be too paranoid, but I definitely needed to know what time they were going to be home. And if they were going to be late, they had to get in touch with me. And a couple of times they slipped. I think each of them slipped, and I really sort of lost it. Like, just was probably more upset than I normally would have been, and said, you really can't do this. Like, you can't not let me know where you are or when you're going to be home. My brother was killed in a car accident. I found that information out in the middle of the night. And so I always had this underlying like anxiety that something would happen to them. And since my brother was killed at the age of 17, I was really anxious about my kids turning 17 and driving because he was killed in a car accident. And so I remember just sort of like breathing a sigh of relief when they all made it through their 17th year of life. So I think I definitely was probably a little more anxious of a parent.
You know, I can relate to a lot of that.
Yeah.
I absolutely did not want my children to drive at 17 because Scott and Matthew were 17 when they died in a car. And so, of course, they didn't. They got their driver's license at 19, both of them. But part of it was that we lived in New York City and they could take subways and we didn't have a car. But secretly, I was glad because I just equated 17 with being in a car accident, especially for my son, because I was like, boys die at 17 in cars. And I had to be really careful about not passing along my anxiety to them too much. And I remember one time I was worried about my son not getting back to me for some reason. And he looked at his friends and he said, just ignore my mom. She had a brother that died, so she tends to be a little overbearing. So Elizabeth, what would you say about this?
Honestly, I'm just kind of reviewing as I'm listening to you guys, which is the cool thing about hanging out with siblings who've had a loss, because you get to compare notes in a unique way. I mean, there's so many things from deciding to have kids in the first place, which we've talked about, and it's just the sense of like, do I want to take on that level of worry and taking care of people after having been a surviving sibling in a family where you're taking care of a lot of people's feelings in a lot of ways. So there was that, there was fear of something happening to him. Like my brother had an illness, so it wasn't just the one event with the car accident. It was like, the first time my son had a bruise because my brother had a part of his disease manifestation was bruising. That was how he was diagnosed.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the backstory, because I know that you came home he came home from school and he had bruising, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember this. I asked my parents when I was working on the book, how they found out. And my dad is an oncologist and he treated a lot of kids with leukemia. One of the manifestations of that, because of the anemia, is massive bruising, just different than, the kind of bruises we get, a single one here and there, big, blotches. And there are also some like little spot type things, but it's a very distinctive bruising appearance. And we were sitting at dinner and it was September, so it was warm enough and my brother was still wearing shorts. And my mom made a comment like, oh, would you look at that? He has more bruises. And my dad looked down at my brother's legs and knew. The second that he saw my brother's bruises. So the first time my son had a bruise, and it was a single bruise, innocuous bruise, I was just like,
so your dad was a doctor.
Yeah.
And he took Ted. How old was Ted at that point?
9.
And he took him to the hospital and put him in a bubble room because they realized he had
aplastic anemia.
Okay.
Yeah, which is it's an immune disorder, but it's, not enough red cells, not enough white cells, not enough platelets, so bruising is part of it.
And he stayed in that bubble room until he died, right?
Yeah, he was 17 when he died. So
now fast forward, you're saying whenever you see bruises or anything, it's like, okay, are my boys okay?
Yeah. Like, how innocuous is a bruise? We get them all the time in life, and yet seeing it on my son for the first time scared me, in a way that I wasn't anticipating. And there are other landmarks, like when my kids were, I think Henry was 6, I had like a scare with a mammogram, and I was 6 when my brother was diagnosed. So there are all these the things that happen at the same age were extra triggery.
Yeah.
My husband just died, and my kids were the same ages that my brother and I were when my brother died. So it's just these weird synchronicities that make different things just sort of extra uncomfortable. And yeah, I'm aware of when my kids pass an age landmark. My older son just turned 18, and so I'm like, okay, that's one past. Yeah.
So he's past the 17-year-old mark.
Yeah.
I remember with both my children, when they passed that mark, I was like, okay,
yeah,
they're past that age.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, and Keith, what about you? Because you got little ones now,
I have
5
little
and 3.
ones. I do, and I'm not sure where the litmus bar is of parents normally being, anxious or nervous
That's a good
about
point.
something happening.
Yeah.
But I will say that definitely very anxious about what if. Oh my gosh. But for me, I make a conscious effort or battle in my head not to allow it to manifest, not to allow anyone to see it. So there's always a battle in my head of what I use is in my own childhood to say, well, if I survived and it was okay for me, then I'm gonna allow them riding a scooter, riding a bike. But there's so many things that could happen that you can be go crazy and just try to put them in bubble wrap. Really,
Totally.
I realize that I can't. So there's always this battle in my head of my first gut is oh my God, what if? And then I have to say, well, did I do it as a child? If I did it as a child, I use that bar to say, okay, let them do it. I don't know what'll happen when they just start driving. I think that'll probably reopen a huge can of worms. My sister also passed from a car accident, so I'm lucky I didn't get there yet. But definitely, when you spoke about anxiety and definitely. Even bruises, I would say my sister died in a car accident, and still if I see a lot of bruises on my child, I'm like, oh, is something wrong? But then I will, consciously try to make sure that I don't get too crazy.
I like what you're saying because I do the same thing. It's like, okay, I know that I have some anxiety, but I don't want I try to hide it from my kids so that they won't be overly anxious.
Right.
So I'm always like, okay, don't tell them too much what's going on. What is your thought about this?
Well, I
Elizabeth?
just wonder how well we hide it.
I know. Well, this is a good point.
I have a feeling they know anyway.
That's a good point.
I think we think we're hiding it.
That's a good, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want my kids to take this anxiety with them.
Right.
And so I always, yes, I was quietly anxious, trying not to express it too much, but like you said, I'm sure that they knew
Yeah.
a lot more than I was showing.
I mean, both of my kids are really sensitive. My younger one especially is an empath, so he just really pulls in the emotions of other people in the room. And I'm like, there's no way he didn't sense it. He may not have known what to name it or what it
Yeah.
was
Right.
for and all those kind of
Yeah.
things, but I'm sure he sensed it. I had another thing, and it's interesting to me listening to you guys because obviously my brother did not die in an accident, but I felt like, watching my kids in the playground, I could see accidents before they happened,
Interesting.
like in my head. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like an OCD thing. I don't know if that's related to the sibling loss thing, that I prepared for disaster or could see disaster.
You prepared for worst case scenario because
Yeah.
we actually had it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I think that's what happens. Is
Interesting.
you prepare for the worst and hope for the best,
Yeah.
or pray for
Yeah.
things you can't control. Right. So,
Yeah.
but you're right. Being prepared
Yeah.
mentally for okay, if this happens, this way you don't break. I think the problem there is you're trying to come up with a mechanism to make sure that you
Yeah.
just don't. If something does happen, that you don't, just lose it.
I actually have a name for
Fall apart.
this. I noticed it in different ways in my life, but I call it like the other shoe dropping syndrome. Like I'm waiting for it. So
Yeah, interesting. I'm wondering if the amount of kids that we all had anything to do with the fact that we had a sibling die.
yeah,
I mean, I know in my case, I had my son, and then I went through many years of infertility and had 2 miscarriages. And we were living in Midtown Manhattan in New York in an apartment, small. And my husband said, we've got this child, he's great, we can't have other kids, let's just stop. And I said, come hell or high water, this kid is getting a sibling. Only because, first of all, I was worried that kids die, and what if one died? And secondly, I wanted him to have a sibling because I had had a brother, and it was the relationship was so important. And fast forward in 2006, my other sister and I flew to China and adopted sisters together so that our brothers would have sisters. Our sons, would have sisters. So, it was interesting how, had I not had a brother die, with that infertility, I may have just said, okay, I've got one son, I'm done. So what about you, Rebecca? Does the amount of
I never
him
really
dying-
thought about that, but I'm guessing, we had 4 in our family before our brother died, and I have 4 children, and I'm guessing that probably did weigh in on that decision. Like, I don't know if I actually was able to voice that, but I think it probably did. And my firstborn son, we named after my brother. So carrying on that name of Scott, that was actually really important to us.
And it's ironic because he looks the most like Scott.
Yes, he
out
does.
of all the 10 grandkids.
Yeah, he does. He does. So I'm guessing having had a sibling die and not recreating my family, but maybe in some way recreating that, like having the 4 kids.
Interesting.
And and as I say that, I'm like, oh, I I hope that, my kids are okay. I mean, there's still that anxiety in the back of my head. I hope nothing happens
When you say
to
I
them.
recreated it for a minute, you thought, wait a minute.
Wait a minute. I hope
I
I'm
don't-
not recreating
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I don't want to have 3
Exactly.
kids. I have 4 kids.
And the fact that that's still there 40 years later,
Yeah.
it's still there in
Yeah.
the back of my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it never occurred to me to have one child.
Okay.
And I don't know that I was having, like people talk about having an extra in case something happens. And, those of us who've been through this know that you don't replace a person.
Right.
It's not possible. So I don't think it was that so much as I felt like I wanted my son to have the experience of being a sibling because my brother was so important to me.
Yeah.
And that it didn't seem right to not do that to me. And ironically, my kids are not that close right now. I mean, maybe they will be later. So you can't control.
We have a
how it
fantasy
all-
of what that's going to
Yeah,
look like. Like,
yeah,
okay, Ted and I were close.
Yeah.
So now my kids will be close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the same as you. I think definitely had 2 because I wanted him to have a sibling. But I think we only had 2 because of the thought of, okay, I don't want to test fate. We have 2 healthy, knock on wood,
Yeah.
two healthy kids. I don't want to chance it, or I don't want to test fate, and so we didn't have more. So
So it kind of, in some way, impacted.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
impacted
take
you
a
as
risk.
well.
Like, I don't want to.
Yeah. And how do your kids get along?
Oh, they're close in age, so right now they're best friends, and
Yeah.
they're 18 months apart. So
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, of getting along, my kids, go through periods of time they get along and they don't. Their age is 23 to 32. But I remember when they were struggling with their relationships, especially when they were teenagers. I think I even said it out loud, voiced it out loud at one point, and said, you're lucky you have a brother. Like I don't have a brother anymore.
Yeah.
Like you're lucky you have a brother. Like figure out your relationship. And then I always felt a little bit guilty saying that. I'm like, I don't want to play like the dead brother card.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I really felt that. I'm like, like you've got a brother, you've got a sister, you're all alive, and so appreciate each other, because you don't know what life's going to offer you, what's going to happen in your life. So be an appreciation for the sibling relationship.
Did that help them?
Probably it stopped the friction, but
Yeah.
maybe it made them feel guilty, which I didn't want that to create that.
Yeah. I mean, my husband and his brother, for years, didn't get along and didn't really interact at all. And I tried that also. I'm like, I wish I had a brother. It didn't help.
Yeah.
Now they're better. But I think that's one of the complicated things about having siblings. You think you have your whole life to work these things out.
right.
If, like your kids, they have the rest of their life to work out this relationship.
Right.
My sister and I, the 2 of us, were only 16 months apart. We fought a lot in high school. And then once we got out of the house, we started becoming really close. So it's hard when all of a sudden you don't have the opportunity to work it through. What is coming up for you in this conversation?
Well, I've done that same thing, and I'm laughing internally as you're talking about the dead sibling card, because I'm
Yeah.
like, we should actually have those printed. Like,
Get along.
yeah, it's time. I'm
You're
using
lucky.
it. I've definitely said that to my kids, and I
Yeah.
don't think it helps. And
Yeah.
I think it's more about me, and they're like, this is our thing.
You're like, Ted and I got along really well. Why don't you two get along?
Yeah, they're just like, that's your thing. Don't impose it on us. Like, I don't think it works.
Yeah.
I think that just makes them realize mom has issues. Yeah, no, I think we need cards though.
It's made me change a lot of the way I am, because I do realize nothing's guaranteed. I think
Yeah,
for me
it's
and my
true.
sister, we always kind of felt, even though we probably even verbalized it, that, when we get older, when we have kids and families, then our relationship would be different.
Yeah.
I mean, she was just a bratty younger sister that was, going in my room and taking all my clothes and, touching stuff. So, but I always had that feeling like, when we get older, we'll be like my mom and her siblings. Like we'll have families, and then it'll be different. So I consciously will think about and go, oh wait, nothing is guaranteed. So I have to, the way I navigate certain things, I don't take things for granted. I think has changed me.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talked on another show about the fact that having a sibling die changed your thought process around having kids and when to have them.
Sure.
Was that true for you?
Yeah, well, I really felt like when my daughter was born, she was the first grandchild, that we had life come back into our family again. And I remember feeling so much joy, like an intense joy that I hadn't really felt since my brother died, as far as regards to people coming in and out. I mean, when I'm married and my sister's married, yes, of course we had these spouses coming in, but someone that's like shares your DNA, shares the DNA of my brother, this beautiful baby coming back into the family and just showing like real like hope again, and just this really deep joy. And I remember being so happy to tell my parents, you're going to be grandparents.
Were they
Like,
thrilled?
They were so thrilled, and it just felt like full circle.
Would you have had Eliza at the same age if Scott had not died?
I have never thought about that. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that.
You were 29.
I was 29.
Okay.
I was 29.
I'm wondering if you did it earlier than you would have.
I'm guessing
because of the
I'm
pressure.
guessing there was something in there because I always worried about my parents.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the perfect daughter
And
after
give them
our
a
brother
grandchild.
died, and then give them their perfect grandchild because they lost their son, you know? So I think there probably was something there. Yeah.
Okay. Elizabeth, what about you?
Yes, in the sense that it took me forever to decide to have kids.
Okay.
Because I think I mentioned that I had carried, I felt like I was a caretaker of so many feelings and carried so much weight of the family and the emotion and making things okay for my parents, and it, it was a heavy thing to carry. So knowing that if I had a child, how much I was willingly going to be playing that role for the rest of my life was not a decision I made lightly. I was scared to do it, and there was just no rational way to make the decision, So eventually I was just like, I guess I will regret this if I don't do it, so I should do it if I want to, but I was terrified. Yeah.
Because you were afraid a child could die. Well,
I was afraid of those things, but I was also afraid of the weight of the caretaking, because I felt I had been caretaking my entire life, and so this was voluntarily choosing it again. It was different that it's voluntary too, versus in the other case.
and you
where,
also saw the level of caretaking that your brother needed. I mean, I know he was in the hospital, so it was different. But
I don't think I was necessarily anticipating that happening. When I say caretaking, it's hard to describe, and I think you guys had it after your brother died, but for me, like pretending to be okay, noticing when my mother wasn't okay, trying to like get her out of it, or my father, or create, or knowing my mother after my brother's death needed someone to go with her and my father wouldn't go, and being the person to fill in, like that was
this is
a weight.
interesting because you had to do it before and after his death.
Yeah, so I've been carrying that a long time, and it was like emotionally heavy. The responsibility for people was heavy.
sense.
And so here was like, I could choose to do that more or not, and that was a hard decision, and because it was very abstract,
And what about you, Keith?
For me, it was the trust. It was, I waited, I think subconsciously / consciously was worried about something happening and being able to emotionally handle that. So I waited as long as possible, but I think there was a point where I was like, I'm going to regret it if I don't.
Yeah.
And I
So
needed to,
you were worried that something might happen to a child?
so
Yeah.
sure. To be
So you-
that open and vulnerable with, when you have a kid, you know it becomes a part of you, and to be able, and I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child. So I can only imagine. I can only think what it would be like, and that would, I was worried about that would break me. So I think I waited as long as possible.
I definitely waited quite a while too. And finally I was like, okay, I guess I need to dive into the deep end if I'm going to do this.
Right. That's pretty
What
much
was
what it is.
interesting for me too as a parent is that when my kids turned 17, I looked at them and went, "Ah, my parents lost a child at 17. I have like, what if this happened?" Like I just had another appreciation of how hard that is.
Right.
I think for a while, I had convinced myself that having lost my brother was the worst thing I could imagine happening, and it almost like inoculated me against other losses. And then at some point I realized, oh no, and I just avoided cursing on your show.
I love it.
This could happen again.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says in this universe that I'm not going to lose another person. And then when you extend that to like a child and all of that, it's very frightening. I think there's a lost innocence in having lost young that you bring forward. I guess I'm just speaking for myself here.
Yeah, I
Is it
agree.
better to know
Yeah.
and be,
I
or
don't
is it
know.
better to be naive and not know?
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
don't know.
obviously, my choice would be to be naive and not have lost my
Yeah.
sister, but I do see it has changed me in a positive ways
That's
of
what-
knowing, would I be who I am today
Yeah.
if it wasn't? And I don't know. I think you asked the question earlier. I don't even know what my life would be like. What would I do as a career? What would I be like as a person if I didn't lose my sister? I feel like it
Yeah.
definitely changed so much.
Keith, that's what I love that you launched into that, because my other thing was, do you feel like you appreciate your children more than you would have? In my case, the answer is yes. Like,
think
I
so.
look at them and think, I'm so lucky that I have them and they're here, and because I realize that people can die early before their time, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, as you were talking, it occurred to me that we're thinking a lot, or we're talking a lot about some of the negatives.
Yes.
I think I'm actually, it's hard to say. I'm a better person in a lot of ways because of my brother's illness and death. I would rather have my brother back, but
Right.
I'm not unhappy with the person I am now. I like the person I am now, and I think I brought strengths to parenting because of that.
Yes.
Brought weaknesses too, and I'm sure my kids would be talking about it in therapy for a long time.
especially because they're teenagers.
Yeah, really. But I do think it gave me strengths as a parent as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. I think that I think I'm bringing more compassion and more understanding, and I passed that along with my
Yeah.
kids.
We can handle adversity better.
can handle
and tough
adversity.
stuff.
Yeah.
Because we've been through this.
Yep.
Darn it, this is a whole nother show. Okay, to be continued. So yes, where can we find you quickly? We've only got 30 seconds.
You can find me through the Open to Hope Foundation,
Okay.
and I'm also on social media, Rebecca H. Bara.
Great. Elizabeth?
You can find me on Facebook, just my regular old page, and on www.findingteddevita.com, just a blog I'm working on.
Facebook private group, Sounds of the Siblings. It's a group, or Compassionate Friends, Staten Island chapter.
Love it. Okay, thank you all so much for this. We like to close by saying, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.